Aloha. Today's episode is brought to you by the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center, USDA NIFA, and the University of Hawaii College of Tropical Ag and Human Resources, and the Livestock Extension Group, as well as the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Center for Ag Profitability.
Aloha and welcome to the Livestock Walaʻau, a podcast aimed to provide educational support, information, guidance, and outreach to our livestock stakeholders in Hawaii and the U.S. We are your hosts, Melelani Oshiro and
Shannon Sand. Today, we're going to be talking with our very own Melelani Oshiro, livestock agent for Hawaii County. She's going to be speaking to us about small-scale livestock production. Thank you, Mele, for being here today.
Thank you, Shannon.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, are you excited to talk a little bit about small-scale livestock production?
Yeah, someone came up and talked to me the other day and was asking about some, just basic things to consider, especially on a smaller scale. So we're talking, these folks are probably closer to an acre to 5 acres, either producing product for their own use at home or things like that, or as an additional income. So, just as a starting point, I think, that's what we're talking about today, is sort of small scale livestock production. It doesn't mean that some of these production practices don't apply in the larger scale. But when you start off on small scale, you kind of want to think about like I just was saying, what some of your goals are. Or what you're doing, right? Are you doing this to provide subsistence for your home? You want a little bit of additional income, you have the land to use. So, you want to put something on there that's going to be able to utilize the land and maybe provide food as well as income for the family, so it could be multiple things, right? And even just the management of your own land, right? Keeping that land in good productivity, and doing those rangeland stewardship, type management systems to be able to.
So I guess I'm going to ask a nosy question. Is there small scale livestock production system that's like really ideal for like Hawaii, or just like, again, I think smaller scale, it's also more cost effective. It's easier for a producer who maybe wants to scale up at some point in the future to start smaller.
Yeah. And those are sort of the type of things you have to keep in mind, right? So if maybe you want to start off on a small scale, you have the land capacity to go larger, but you want to start off small, but you should still take into consideration those types of things. If you do expand, what kind of things you keep in place for that, what the space you have right now, the different things you might, or equipment that you might need. So to answer your first question, is there a system particularly for Hawaii? It depends, because it's going to depend sort of on the space that you have, right? How much acreage do you have? Or is your area more suitable for grazing animals? Is it more suitable for layer hens or broilers or something like that, right? So if you're in a really dry area where your forage production is not the best, or you don't have the best quality, raising some of the grazing animals is, sure, you could probably do so, but it's probably not the best choice of livestock for you at that point. And if you do decide to go with it that way, you're going to have to realize you're probably going to have a little bit more investment in sort of things like for feed, right? Whether it's to produce more feed of that's there on the land, or purchasing supplemental feed, right? For those areas, if you're having grazing animals in areas that don't have a lot of feed. So you might be better off thinking of something that is already sort of a confined feeding operation. So like poultry, that you kind of have to have some kind of conventional feed for them, unless you have a really good supplement. And in Hawaii, there are some byproducts that folks have used. The macnut cake is one popular one. That people have been using for both hogs as well as poultry. But depending on what you get, you have to still see how your production is and if it's meeting those nutritional requirements of the animals. So to go back to answering, I wouldn't say there's a particular model that best fits Hawaii. I think you have to find a model that best fits your area, if that makes sense.
That's a good,
Yeah. So, and like I said, there's lots of benefits, there's lots of challenges, but understanding your goals, and then addressing the benefits or challenges that you might have, right? So like we talk about space. How much acres do you have? And if you have a great area that has a lot of forage that you can raise those grazing animals on, how much space do you have, and what's in that space as far as forage quality? So you can understand how many animals you can raise, whether whether a smaller ruminant is going to be better for your area or beef cattle or something like that. It's going to
Yeah.
depend sort of on what you have there, right? And then on the end of your sort of production management, what are you doing with these products at the end? If you're raising layers, where are the eggs going to go? Are you using them for home? Are you going to sell them? Look at the requirements through the Department of Health of how you can sell farm products, because there are some requirements. There's no processing units for poultry here on the in Hawaii County, so
That's true.
mostly everything would be sold. If you have spent hens or something, to be sold as a live animal, unless you're doing your own processing on your farm for your meat, which is absolutely something you could do. But those are things to keep in mind,
Well, and
what
with the
happens.
processing, if you process on your own farm, because we have spoken with Brittany Anderson from Sugar Hill, I know that you have to keep immaculate records, correct?
Yeah. Yes, and if it's
Yeah.
depending if you're selling it, right? So her
Yeah.
operation's a little bit different because they do, if it's for home use, it's a little bit different. Yeah,
Oh yeah, home
because
use is yeah.
yeah, but if you are doing it for sale, then you have to have different types of exemptions and whatnot. So those are questions for Department of Health that you talk to. You can call us too. We can help guide you into those different resources
Who to
and
call?
whatnot. Yeah, and
Yeah.
then other things to think about is the equipment or supplies that you might need, whether it be fencing, housing, nesting boxes, feeders,
Mhm.
all those types of things. So look at different production systems across the
Yes.
state, and you can there's a few different systems for different types of livestock. So you just have to look at ones that sort of
Yeah.
address your needs in your area and something that's going to fit for your area, right? And just understanding and having a good starting plan of what you want to do, that just reduces the risk of you having to spend more money later
Yeah.
on updating things or adding other equipment, or even just the health of the animals. That's another important part, right? So you have different segments of your plan that you want to look at. So small scale livestock production, definitely has a lot of benefits that you can apply into your income or food for your family, but there are
Yeah.
challenges that you have to consider, and a lot of those challenges are going to really depend on where you are and what type of livestock you want to raise. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely, absolutely. So, and also kind of some stuff I want to take it back to risk a little bit, like you said with planning. I think the planning of like any sort of
absolutely.
endeavor for home or
Yeah.
like again as a small side hustle type of thing, I was like, I think that's important because it's really easy for like costs to get out of hand when we're not, I don't want to say paying attention when we're not paying attention, but like sometimes, and especially with the cost of feed in the last couple of years, woo, I
Yeah.
know you have small animals, small livestock
Yeah.
yourself. And I was like, it is one of those things. And it's like, oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, making sure those benefits, or your costs are not outweighing your benefits in that
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. So we start to, I think some of the things to really consider when you decide or you're thinking about raising livestock in a small scale in your area. I think the first thing to kind of think about is your area, right? What's the
Yeah.
regulations in your area? Is there certain zoning? Are you on ag zone? Because if you're not, in Hawaii County, if you're not in an ag zone lot, you pretty much can't raise ag in that area. You can't
Well, I
have
thought
any type.
you can't have backyard chickens because I know in Hilo you could. You cannot now?
Not unless you're in an agriculturally zoned lot, from my understanding. And I'm correct, if anybody out there hears me, correct me if I'm
I
wrong,
don't know why I
but
was thinking you could do backyard chickens.
no.
No.
You
Oh,
need to
okay.
be in an agriculture zone lot in order to be raising agriculture. So check the zoning of your area.
I don't
Your
know.
different areas of the island is going to be different. So just, you can go on there. You can call the tax office or even the other folks in the county. And I have we'll put the links where you can look up those types of
Yeah.
zoning areas. And
Yeah,
then,
because I was like, I always get confused with the zoning. I'm not gonna lie.
yeah,
So,
and in some areas say, "Oh yeah, you can have ag or you can have livestock," but then they list certain species that you're not allowed. Like in some
yeah.
areas that won't
Yeah.
allow hogs, or a certain amount of them, like certain number of them. So you have to look into those types of things. So look at the permittable species that are
Yeah.
allowed in those areas. And the other thing to consider is even if you're in an ag area, you might have a homeowner association or in
Yeah.
the surrounding areas, because they have different regulations. So always take those types of things into consideration, right? Where the area is, your what's permittable in the area that you're on. And then like I was saying, looking at your land area and location, and deciding, are you going to get a grazing species or non-grazing species, and how much area does that grazing animal need based on the type of sort of forage species that you have there. Those things are going to change across the island. We all know we have a lot of different microclimates around our island, and the production zones are very different.
Very different.
So yeah, knowing where you are and how the forage production is in that area and sort of what type of forage species and quality you have there is very important, right? Understanding the climate and things, it'll be able to kind of identify sort of how many animals you can if you are doing a grazing species based on the area. And call us in extension, because those are things we can help. We have some historical data of rainfall in certain areas and production zones and things like that. So
well, and I think the mesonet system will be going up in the next year or so, hopefully, which is going to be really exciting for those in the ag industry. I'm just selfish because we have one here, and I was like, I think it'll be really cool because it gives some insight, for those in production.
Yeah, and we do have a few publications on suitable areas for grass-finished beef production. And so even if it's pointed towards grass-finished beef production, it's still a grazing animal. So you can still look at sort of the zones on those maps and then the forage species that are in there, because it'll help us give an idea of where you are. And when you come to ask questions, you can say, oh, we're in this area or whatnot. And we can kind of help identify some of the, things that you may want to consider before jumping into some type of livestock, and other things to consider is just the time. How much time do you have in the day for daily care? The amount of time it may take for you to initially set things up, equipment maintenance, if you have large equipment or housing, and how often you have to do those types of things, if you have to install perimeter fencing, all those types of things. So look at those, give yourself a plan, a sort of timeline of what you want to do. And, of course, the other thing to consider is cost of everything, right? Are you going to have to put in fencing? Are you going to have to put in cross fencing? Do you need to build shelters, feeders, almost, you can, and if you're not building it, you're going to have to be buying and purchasing it. Yeah. So look into those types of costs, and, look at annual costs for things. You also have to look at the health costs of the animals. So then are they going to need annual vaccinations? Just basic health care for them. And, that's another thing I want to say that's very important, is the health aspect of the animals, understanding that now we have this new ruling for over-the-counter antibiotics are not available at your readiness. So I think by September,
really have to establish that vet client relationship.
Yeah. So you need to have that in order for you to be able to get sort of medications now, because a lot of them are not going to be over the counter.
Yeah, so that's I heard LA 200 is not over the counter anymore, and that was the thing growing up. And I think you and I talked about this offline before, but like I was surprised. I was like, oh, because it's always been the thing, Yeah.
So a lot of the stuff that you could get before, you can't. So that's another thing to consider in cost, is that initial appointments and probably farm calls you do, and getting familiar with your local vet that's around in your area. And if they'll see those certain species, because you will, there's going to be a time that you need to have vet care, and most vet clinics ask them what their requirement is, but most of them, they want to be able to have seen your herd at least annually. So in order for them to prescribe stuff, they have to see them annually. So, work that out with them, get an estimate how much it would cost for them to do something like that, because you need to consider the health aspect as well, for whatever animals or livestock you decide to raise.
But I do want to say this as a ag econ business management person, that is a tax write-off. So I know it does cost money, but it's a tax write-off. As long as it is like part of, again, like a side business or a side hustle, and it is, generating additional income. So
a lot of these, if you're
doing it, if it's a pet, it's not. But if it's, again, if it's something you're doing for additional income, it is a tax write-off.
So, in order for it to, Sharon, I'm going to ask you this question because you are our finance business person. But in order for it to be considered a business, you have to generate income. Is that correct?
$1,000. That's it. Okay. It's real easy. I mean, you can do it. It sounds crazy, but you can do $1,000 in eggs a lot faster than people think with just a few hens. Yeah.
And then that would be considered,
especially if you think of it over the 12-month year. So yeah.
Yeah.
But you've got all those startup costs. Again, those are all tax write-offs that you can take off too. So
yeah.
And
there's a lot of programs that came out too for increasing food sustainability in rural areas and things that came down. So there were some funding opportunities. There will be probably again. So, get
USD,
in with
FSA,
like
I think has some stuff. So NRCS, HDOA had stuff a couple years ago. So
so if you get on their newsletters and just, check their websites or get, the information sent to you via email, HDOA was the one that has usually every year has a grant. They've had one for the past couple years. So, education and learning about exact species or things that you want to raise, coming to folks in cooperative extension or just working with local veterinarians or even other farmers or ranchers in your area. If you know someone that's doing it, ask them the questions, and whatnot. And most times they're actually pretty willing to talk to you and answer questions or at least lead you in an area to try and find an answer.
And I think there's a lot of benefits to doing your own because again, you kind of get to control the genetics and things that you have in your herd or your flock. And, again, depending on your preferences, you can cater towards that, right? Or whatever your clientele's preferences are. So that's there's a lot of pros and cons to that. So I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. And I think, choosing a species is probably one of the kind of first things that you want to think about, right? Because that's going to really dictate what you're going to do, how much infrastructure you need, and all those types of kind of pushes forward your next plan, right? And once you understand the area that you're in, any regulations and what species are permitted, then you can go ahead and start to decide what you want to raise. Choosing something that choosing something that you're going to want to raise, that not just choose it because that's all you can, but choose it because it's also something that you want to do, because then, it'll be more enjoyable, put it that way. So, things to consider, especially if you're doing animals for meat production, is the processing units that you're going to want to go to. Are you going to do on-farm slaughter? All those types of regulation for certain species. In order for it to be USDA checked and are approved, it needs to be done in a USDA certified unit, inspected plant anyways. So take those things into consideration and, find the plants that do, on the Big Island, Kulana Foods will do hogs and small ruminants and beef cattle. But that's the outside of our smaller MSU units. I believe they're the only ones that will do.
Yeah, because I think there are a couple of mobile units that are certified USDA on Big Island, right? Or no?
Yeah, there are. A couple,
so I mean, there's a lot I think to consider when starting. So I was like, it seems like Mele.
Yeah. And I'm sure like Shannon, you folks in the US have so much more availability for processing units here. I think that's one of our big bottlenecks
actually, like that is an issue here as well. I mean, USDA recently, I think we talked about it a few episodes ago, the USDA small processing grants. There were a couple of like in the US there because of partially because of vertical integration and companies combining, and so there are fewer plants, but they're bigger. So it's actually, they've discovered, I think over the last few years, that there actually needs to be quite a few more than they thought there did, just smaller scale. So I know we actually have one going in here in North Platte that is not considered super large scale, but I think it does. I want to say that it's going to do 1,500 to 1,500 a day. So, which is not huge for the mainland. So I think it's considered average or medium-ish sizes on processing. I'm not as familiar with, but that will be something that I will be becoming familiar with over the next year. So we'll learn a lot more about that. But I did work with a couple of people out here that are small group that want to do a small processing facility that would do like a few hundred a day. So, but that is something that if a group of people wanted to do in Hawaii, I would strongly encourage. I mean, there's definitely opportunity there to go after some funds to create some additional processing, because processing is a big bottleneck, especially for those small ruminant animals. I mean, it's not great for livestock like cattle, but like pigs, chicken, goats, it's a struggle at times. So
we don't, I mean, outside of Hawaii County, Oahu doesn't have anything for small ruminants or hogs currently. I believe there's some stuff in the works, but I think that's a whole nother podcasts. But
Okay.
yeah. So, considering or choosing a species, look at some of your grazing species, cattle, goat, sheep. Those are sort of the more common grazing species. You can have pastured poultry as well. They do pretty
Yeah.
well. You just need to have better, certain infrastructure for them.
Yeah.
Rabbits is another popular species, and
Yeah.
hogs. Most hogs are either in some type of confinement, whether it be in like deep litter systems or folks use pastured hog systems
Yes.
and
It's always
whatnot.
popular
So
here.
yeah. So
Yeah.
just, and within those species, there's then different breeds that you can, then also choose that might do better in your area. So
Yeah.
consider not just the species, but then the breeds that you are within there to decide,
And most places have several options on what you can choose based on your
Mhm.
area, usually, in my experience. What about you,
Yeah.
Melly?
Yeah, yeah. I'm a lot of I would say you can get a few different species, and there's going to be species that do better here in the tropics,
Yeah.
than some you might look in the States and be like, oh, they're great meat breeds. They might be great meat breeds, but they might not do so well here. And a cross of something might be better, So, look into some of the local publications, reach out to us in extension. We can help you, give you more information on those types of things. And, the things to consider too in the species that you choose is sort of their lifespan, right? How long is it going to take if you're grazing beef cattle? What's it going to take them to get from the production endpoint, right? They're going to be 18, 24 months if they're beef cattle, typically if they're going to grass finish, so what you need to
Hogs are
provide.
what, 6 to 8 months?
Yeah. So what you need to provide,
Six to
in
12?
that growing
Yeah.
period, right? How long of a growing period do you want to deal with, or, understand what the growing period is for the species that you're getting, because then that dictates all those different things in your timeline and your calendar. There's dual purpose breeds out there as well. When you choose a different species, you can have meat, milk, or fiber from some of your sheep or
Mm-hmm.
goats. And, just thinking about market lambs, at least, less than a year
Yeah.
is what they are considered a market lamb. So think about
Yeah.
those types of things. Yeah. And the goats, we have some folks use their meat goats as dual purpose in a sense that they're weed control and management for the brush, and they go off into market, So
Yeah.
that's totally fine to do. Just consider that if you're producing a meat animal, what they're eating is going to go into their meat, right? And so you have to understand that if they're eating sort of the lower quality stuff, you might not meet those expectations for meat quality or composition of the animal. So you might have some supplementation, but you definitely could. Goats are one of those species that are able to kind of utilize sort of the more rough, poor quality forage and
Yeah.
still do pretty well. So those are things to consider, and consider those animals' nutritional requirements across the different species, like I was saying, right? Where even when they're during different stages of growth. So if they're lactating or non-lactating, I'm throwing a lot of things, but those are things to consider when you're choosing sort of a species, right? And the amount of growing time that they would need. So
I think there's a lot of options and stuff. So, and like I said, it sounds like there's a lot of thoughts that need to go into planning this.
mm,
So, because you
yeah.
want to mitigate your risk too, because you don't want to spend money when you don't have to and stuff
Hmm.
with the price of everything nowadays. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I mean, the nice thing is that at the end of the day, you would have protein sources for your
Yeah.
family at considerably less than probably grocery store prices. And again, you get to have control over the diet as well as, again, you have higher levels of control over the outcome of that protein.
Hmm.
Would you say that, Melee, or no?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's, so it's all really about the planning process, right? And looking at having a great plan before you go on it is probably the best way to reduce your risk of, forgetting
Yeah.
something or not, considering a certain option for some other species, so look at all those things, do your research into the different species or whatever operation you want to have, right?
Yeah.
And just get educated, right? Get as much resources out that you can, reach out to
Yeah.
extension. We can share resources with you that, we have from in the States. There's not just good resources here on island. There's good resources.
Well, you guys have there's a lot of local research
Mhm.
done on small scale livestock production in Hawaii and the States. But yeah, so it's
Yeah.
like so accessing people though, like for educational purposes. So like you with like extension, but like who else should they reach out to potentially just to start establishing some of those relationships and stuff.
Yeah, your local vet in your area for sure. Get in touch with their local vet clinic, your extension agents in the area. We also have some specialists, the NRCS folks as well. They have great resources and funding that, could also help. Those at FSA is another one, as far as funding stuff.
Yeah.
So take time to even talk to your neighbors. If you're in an area that people are already producing animals around you, definitely take time and ask, just talk story, right? That's how you get, I think, sometimes the best information. But it all goes out to your plan, of understanding what's allowed in your area and what species are going to best suit your area and you. So if you all have more questions about this,
Oh, I have a really dumb question that I kind of know the answer to, I feel like, because I went to school with a bunch of vet majors. But with establishing, like, with your local veterinarian, I'm assuming that you need to also verify that they do the species you're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's not, not all vets are going to be working with what we consider large animals. So our livestock species.
Livestock.
Yeah. So you probably have to find the vet that will work with your species that you have. And they're pretty good. Like if they don't, they'll probably recommend you someone, but you do need to, at least have that relationship with them. So yeah. And, there's lots of things I think health-wise that you can, there's still going to be things that you can get, but the antibiotics are things that you can't. So you need to have those relationships in order to get the prescriptions for those types of things.
Yeah.
If you ever need them. So, but yeah, definitely. Yeah. So talking with your vet and just finding out what local vets are around in the area. Yeah. And, the other good place to get some resources is your feed stores, your local feed stores. If you're going to be buying feed, it's good to make and understand where they are, what they carry, because feed into the islands can be sometimes limited.
Challenging. Yeah.
So yeah. And you just, might not, understanding those sort of like, what they carry, how often they get things in, this and that, is also a good place to kind of talk story is there at the feed store.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Mele.
You're welcome.
Yes, we hope our listeners found this informative and that it'll be useful to them. Also, if you have not already done so, please be sure to fill out our feedback fest to let us know your thoughts about this podcast so we know what you would like to hear of in the future.
Yeah, and make sure to follow us on our social media pages, the Livestock Walaʻau and Livestock Extension Group, if you haven't done so already. Be sure to visit the UHC-TAR Extension website and our YouTube channel listed in the show notes.
For additional information about this topic, see the show notes of the podcast and the description box of our YouTube page. Thanks for listening to the Livestock Walaʻau. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review anywhere you're listening to this, and then stay tuned for next month.
Yes, thanks again to the sponsors, the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center, USDA NIFA, the Livestock Extension Group, and CTAR, and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Center for Ag Profitability. Mahalo for listening. Ahui ho.
Ahui ho.